Welcome to Congregation L'Dor Va-Dor's Touch of Torah. Tonight it's April 19th, 2022, and our speaker tonight is Rabbi Barry Silver, and we're going to be discussing Deuteronomy, Ra'eh, due to it being during the week of Pesach. And take it away, Rabbi.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. Actually, this Friday night is kind of a hodgepodge of different verses that are offered. They usually concern the Exodus because we're still during Passover. So I thought I would reach into one of the passages that comes up this week, which is Exodus 13 and 14, which describes the departure of the Jews and the plagues and all the excitement. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you, and then I'll be glad to entertain any questions, comments, rebuttal, or discussions of wherever you want this to lead. So one of the things that's really, really important to remember is that the immortal words of Moses that we remember, let my people go. Most people remember that, but they don't remember the words that come after. What he told Pharaoh was, Shalach et ami, let my people go, v'ya'avdeni, that they may serve me. What this indicates to us is that as Jews, freedom is not just a goal in and of itself. It's a means to an end. We have to be free so that we can serve our purpose, a noble purpose, which is to bring light to a world of darkness. And so we need to remember that we're in the United States. We live in a land of freedom. And for many people, that's good enough. We're free. What else do we want? Well, that's just half of it. We're free as Jews, and we should use that freedom for a good purpose. Now, if you look around the Jewish community, and we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to ask, are we fulfilling our purpose as Jews? Are we bringing light to a world of darkness? The answer is rather painfully obvious. We have to be candid. We're not doing a very good job of bringing unity and harmony to the world. We can't even bring unity to the Jewish people. Jewish people aren't talking to each other. We're divided up along divided partisan lines, just like the general community is. We're no better. We're not setting the example. So what do we need to do? We need to pass over. We need to grow and develop. We need to make it our goal for all Jews to get along. How does that happen? By all having the same opinion? No. Many people think, well, we can't get along, we disagree. No. You don't need to agree in order to get along. You just need to have respect for differences, and you need to be able to dialogue and talk to each other. Our goal should be unity without uniformity, community without conformity. Each of us can do our part. Talk to people who don't agree with you and try to engage them in dialogue. Don't just agree with them, disagree with them, but try to do so agreeably. This is something that is not easy. And many people say, well, Rabbi, that's not easy. That's not going to happen. Anything worthwhile is not easy. Nobody said that our goal and our role as Jews is easy, but it is something we're required to attempt. The other thing I wanted to share with you is something that's kind of a rather amusing episode in this passage. And the people are grumbling to Moses. Moses is trying to quell them. The Egyptians are closing in on them. They got the backs of water, and Moses is crying out. And God says to him, why are you crying out to me? Go do something. Get going. Very important lesson. Many people, they're confronted with difficulties in their life. They start praying to God, deliver me, help me. Well, if there is a power out there that we can tap into, this power is one which requires us to tap into it and do the heavy lifting. not seek external deliverance, but deliverance from within. There's other things that are interesting also about the passage. It says that each person must regard themselves as if they personally came out of Egypt. Well, why would that be? Why? We weren't living thousands of years ago. Why would we look at it that way? Because if this is just a story about what happened to somebody else, and we don't take it personally, it doesn't really help us. What we are called upon to do is to act as if we personally came out of Egypt. Egypt, my friends, is a metaphor. Egypt, Mitzrayim, is a Hebrew word from Metzer, meaning a strait. It's a geographical term, but it also means narrowness. And so this is interpreted to mean we personally emerge from narrow-mindedness to a place of liberation of thought and liberation of mind and liberation of our full potential. From narrowness into a potential to reach our promised land. We personally need to go through that exercise. Not easy to do, but again, even though it's not easy, it's certainly worthwhile. It's very easy for us to look at somebody else and say, that person is narrow-minded. They are stuck. They're not thinking clearly about this. Much harder, but more beneficial for us to look at ourselves and say, I think I'm being narrow-minded. I think there's a broader view that I'm missing. That is what we're called upon to do. As if I personally escaped from my narrow-minded thinking, and I was able to take a broader view. A view maybe like our ancestors imagined God would take from on high, looking at us and examining our lives. Or another way of saying that is a cosmic perspective or a rational point of view, not our own subjective point of view, a logical, rational point of view. I want to share something else with you about the passage. If you talk to the literalists, they will tell you, well, this really happened. And it's very scientific. I hear Orthodox rabbis often say, oh, this definitely could have happened. You see, the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, it has tides. And sometimes the water recedes, and sometimes it fills back up. And so this is nothing that couldn't have happened. This is something which obviously the water receded, and then suddenly Egyptians came through, their chariots got stuck, and they got covered with water. I don't think I need to tell you how preposterous this is, but just in case I'll belabor the obvious. The book of Exodus says that there was a wall of water. It doesn't say like there was a little swampy area and the wheels got stuck. It said Moses lifted up his staff, and when he did, the waters parted and formed a wall of water on two sides. The Jews marched through, he lets his arm down, waters come crashing back over the Egyptians, and they didn't get stuck, they drowned. The water, where they were tumbling around, the water overwhelmed them and they drowned. Okay, so you can't explain this by natural means. Either this was a supernatural event that happened like nothing else, or it never happened at all, and it's mythological. You can't really have it both ways. And if you're going to try to have it both ways and say, well, this is a natural event, now you have to say, all right, what happened to coincide exactly with Moses lifting his arm up and then down, Jews coming through. And then you also have to say the plagues were all natural events also. The water turning into blood, the hail killing all the animals. Somehow the animals come back to life so they can be killed again by the locusts and the darkness. And it's all, you have to believe all of it or none of it. So rational people who look at this scientifically, logically say, these are tremendous stories like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Native American mythology, Hindu mythology, Jewish mythology, but our myths have great lessons and give great insights into what our people thought and teach us what it means to be free, what it means to be a light to the nations, what it means to take responsibility, what it means to get going and to do something to take charge in your own life. These lessons, these stories are very, very valuable. And that's a logical way of looking at it. You don't have to look at it that way. You could look at it in a supernatural way. But once you do, then you're at pains to explain, well, how do we know then that Jesus didn't do all the miracles that the Christians claim? How do we know that Muhammad didn't fly up in a chariot into the heavens? How do we know that all these other mythologies didn't happen? Why choose ours over all the other ones? That's something that you'll have to grapple with. Let me see what else. Something else that is kind of interesting. According to the Torah, the Jews lived in Sukkot, in little sukkahs, in little booths as they went through the desert. This also strains credulity a little bit. It says in the Torah that there were 600,000 men, not women or children, just the men, 600,000. Extrapolating from this, demographers say that means there were 2 million people that must have come out of Egypt. Now I ask you, does it make sense that when they go out into the wilderness, a wilderness area, they find wooden huts enough to house 2 million people in a wilderness? Does that make sense? Here is one way to make sense of it. Very interesting. It says in the Torah, when the Jews first emerged from Egypt, they encamped at a location called Sukkot. It's a place name, and that's where they camped. They encamped there, and then they migrated out. It seems like far more likely that somebody misconstrued they encamped in Sukkot, the place, and they construed this to mean in Sukkot, meaning a booth or a tabernacle. That seems like a better explanation. But if you have that explanation, what happens to the holiday of Sukkot? No worries. We can still celebrate the harvest, the miracle of growth, and the joy and the thanksgiving that we have for the food that we eat. Sukkot is the precursor of Thanksgiving. It's still a great holiday to celebrate, and we still have reason to rejoice, valid reasons to rejoice in our good fortune with our harvest. Those are just a few things I wanted to share about this passage. It's chock full of meaning, and it's a passage that's really a seminal passage in the history of the Jewish people. You could think of it really as the birth of the Jewish people. Abraham was one individual, Isaac and Jacob. When you get to Egypt and the people emerging out of Egypt, you now have the birth of a nation. And this is the beginning. And that's also why the Jewish people have a calendar that starts really in April. And April, the month of Aviv, is the first month. Makes sense. The springtime, the beginning of the foliage. That's the first month. Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah occur in the 7th month. So it's the beginning of the religious calendar, and it's also the beginning of our people. And I think I'll stop there and turn it over to anyone. If you agree with me, I'd love to hear from you. If you disagree, I'd love to hear from you even more. We can have a good conversation that way. Or if you want to talk about something else, you're welcome to do so. But let's start out if anybody has any comments they'd like to make about the Torah passage from Exodus. Harris, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to discuss Reform and Orthodox. Hold on.
No, you're unmuted, Harris.
You're good.
I was in charge of the interfaith meeting at our city. I was a supervisor at the city, and we had an interfaith meeting, and we had all these clerics there, and we had a Reform and Orthodox rabbis there, and they never spoke one word to each other. They would talk to the priest, the minister, but they didn't. So I don't think they will ever talk. I think that's my experience. This was 20 years ago.
Well, Harris, you are familiar with Rabbi Kievman, who did talk at L'Dor Va-Dor. We've had Orthodox rabbis in our synagogue, and they talk. So it does happen, but I had to be very genteel, very polite in my comments. I was not exercising my normal normal proclivities in order to make it happen. But you are right, Harris, 100% correct. We have at L'Dor Va-Dor a much easier time finding a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Baptist, a Mormon, an atheist. They freely come into our synagogue and mix it up with us and shoot the breeze. An Orthodox rabbi, that's another story. That's hard to do. And that is a very, very sad state of affairs. And I agree with what you're saying completely.
Well, we had a very nice guy. It was, when I don't remember his name, the Orthodox guy who was there on Tuesdays, who finally got a job.
Yeah, well, it's not that they're not nice guys. I mean, they could be very nice, very polite, very good to their families. It's just that they are nervous about mixing it up with people who disagree with them because they could be exposed. My dad used to tell this joke. They asked him, how do you get along with the Orthodox rabbi? He says, I get along with him wonderfully. I go my way and he goes God's. Or actually, I'm misquoting it. They asked the Orthodox rabbi, how do you get along with Rabbi Silver? And he says, I get along with him great. He goes his way and I go God's. That gives you a little indication of what the problem is.
So what you're talking about, Harris, is Rabbi Zvi Khan. And he was a modern Orthodox, and he was very flexible, I want to say, more flexible than most Orthodox would be.
Right.
And I think we're probably going to have him back to discuss in the summer when he has his break from his teaching job in the high school in Boca. So.
Yes, it was Rabbi Zvi Khan. Thanks for reminding me. Very congenial, very open, very, very nice guy. Wonderful family, beautiful person.
And very honest.
Well, yeah, and very honest. Yes, he was. But still, I had to be very careful because if I just came out and said all the things I would normally say, he would have been highly offended. The way it was, he was just moderately offended and not offended enough to boycott. The other one, Rabbi Kievman, I don't think he would have tolerated much of my opinions. But that's what the problem is. I mean, the fact that he's an aberration, it's so difficult and it's so few and far between. And also, I can tell you this, in all the years of interfaith work that we've done, my father and I, probably consisting of probably about 80 years, not once have we ever been invited to an Orthodox synagogue to speak. And that they would never, well, so far, they've never allowed a rabbi from a different denomination in there to speak and share their thoughts with their flock. And that is a very sad state of affairs. Conservative rabbis, conservative synagogues, doesn't happen very often either. And certainly they wouldn't have somebody like me, because I'm way off the deep end as far as they're concerned. I'm beyond reform as far as being a heretic, because I actually believe that religion should make sense and it should be rational. That is a heretical belief as far as they're concerned. So they're not gonna put up with me, but they don't usually put up with too much. There is an effort in this area though, where a reform and conservative synagogue join together in some fashion to offer like religious school, but it's usually not at the same time. It's usually you go to one or the other. If we had an opportunity to have an Orthodox rabbi and reform or me or someone sharing views, it would be fascinating. It really would be, because we've done it. And it is very interesting. The dialogues that we've had have been very, very interesting. The Rabbi Khan, when we got into it, some people said afterwards, like, well, that was terrible. You guys were really disagreeing. That was disrespectful. But other people said, no, that was the best. Those were the best sessions we had because we got to see contrasting points of view. We'll keep trying, Harris. We will definitely keep trying to make it happen. Don't give up. We have faith.
Okay.
Anybody else want to share some thoughts? Go ahead, Stanley.
And I was talking to my daughter to see how her sedra was Friday and Saturday. And she lives up in Maryland. Silver Spring area. And Saturday, she went to a Seder. She described it as ultra reform, progressive, however they consider themselves. And they chose to modernize everything. So instead of talking about 10 plagues, they redid that and talked about homelessness and feeding the poor,
Right.
and you name it, and whatever religion, minority progression,
Right.
and whatever else is current events in our world,
Yeah.
as opposed to what that was. She said she enjoyed it, even though that's not how she lived her Jewish life. So I thought that was interesting, you know, because she went to Hebrew school and knew what was expected in a conservative kind of world. But to hear her talk about this, I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I'm glad that she appreciated that. You know, if we go to a Seder and we recall the 10 plagues of Egypt, and that's as far as it goes, it doesn't really apply to us. Like, I don't think too many of us are worried about boils or locusts
Right.
or hail in Florida. You know, so these stories, they're interesting stories, but they don't really apply to us. But when you talk about plagues like ignorance, arrogance, intolerance, gun violence, interfaith conflict, warfare, violence, these are real life plagues that affect us. And we as Jews are commanded to try to be a light and to try to deal with these plagues. You know, the plagues didn't affect the Jewish people. The Jewish people were immune to all of them. And so we need to figure out, how can we immunize ourselves against these plagues, these modern plagues, and then share the secret of our immunity with others. And it's true that throughout history, many times there have been real plagues, bubonic plague and others, and the Jews have not been nearly as susceptible because of our hygiene, because of our health practices. And it is true that the Jewish people have been somewhat immunized against some of the other plagues of ignorance and arrogance. It's also very interesting to note that if you take a general population like in the Middle Ages, they were believing all types of crazy stuff. And most people believed it, so people figured, well, everybody believes this, I guess it's true. One thing that the Jewish people had that was a big advantage, they were told, you people are children of the devil. You people killed Jesus. You people are pariahs. You people are evil. You people poison the wells. The Jews knew that these things weren't true. And so we were taught, we understood that just because everybody's telling it or saying it or believing it doesn't make it true. And we learned to be free thinkers and to think for ourselves and not just think like the crowd. We were able to think differently than the crowd. And that was one of our strengths. And so, you know, I think that's really important that we look at this in a modern way. Now, each of us might have a top 10 list that's different. Stanley, your list of the top 10 plagues in our country, what's the 10 things that are the worst? Might be different than mine or anybody else's here. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in that exercise. But there are some things that are just like politically correct that we shouldn't just pay lip service to that. Like a lot of it's like gay and lesbian rights and transsexual rights and all these things. These are things that are really front and center with the classic liberal ideology. I have no problem with people being treated equally, but it's not necessarily the top of my agenda. I'm much more concerned with the fate of the planet, what's going to happen to the planet, what's happening with gun violence in the country, what's it, lack of health care and things like that. Yeah, these other things are important, but there's other things that I think we need to deal with, and especially religious extremism, which usually doesn't make it into the top 10. Anybody else want to share some thoughts? Go ahead, Suzanne.
Well, I kind of grew up believing in Moses parting the Red Sea and the Tower of Babel and all that stuff. And you say, well, that stuff never happened. So I'm just curious why you think we should continue year after year to read the Torah, the same passages over and over again, and talk about them if they're all not true.
Well, like my dad said, they didn't happen, but they're all true. Okay. So the Tower of Babel clearly didn't happen, but it's true in that there are many, many, many stories that we read, many fables, many myths, many things that we read about that, Shakespeare writes about things that didn't actually happen, but they're truisms. He was a genius. He was brilliant in pointing out things about human nature. So my father believed that these stories didn't happen, but they're true. Tower of Babel teaches us about pride and hubris and arrogance and thinking that our technology can make us like gods, and we don't need to worry about how we treat each other and what values we have. We just want to gain power. And this is something that's a big problem in our day. There are ways that we know that these things didn't happen if we think about it logically. The Tower of Babel actually has in it where the gods are talking to themselves, and it uses the plural, and it says we need to change or make them not understand each other lest they find out about us where we are. It actually comes from a time when they believed that God was actually up on the clouds, up in the heavens, literally. And they actually believed that if you built a tower high enough, human beings would be able to invade God's world, kind of like ascend to Mount Olympus. And they were worried about that. They were nervous. And so God confounded their language so they wouldn't find out their secrets. I suppose if somebody wanted to, they could believe it, but I would ascribe the legitimacy or the credibility of that story on a par with Wizard of Oz. I say if you said which is more likely, Tower of Babel or Wizard of Oz, I'd have to toss a coin. I'd probably go with Wizard of Oz. I suppose there could be such a place, but I mean, the other thing about Tower of Babel that's interesting that most people don't realize, it says before the story of the Tower of Babel, leading up to it, it says, now, all the people on earth were speaking one language. They had to say that in order to set up the story. They're all speaking one language, and they're all creating this tower. And then all of a sudden, God messes with them, and now they're speaking different languages. First of all, we know that there never really was a time in the Middle East where all the people in the world were speaking one language, because they didn't even know about Native Americans. They didn't know about people in China. They didn't know about Aborigines in Australia. They didn't know about that. So they didn't know that there were people speaking other languages. It comes from a place of appalling ignorance about the rest of the world. And they thought their world was the only world. But what's even more indicative of the fact that the story can't be true, I don't say it might not be true, it can't be true, is that about 10 verses earlier, it's saying that all the peoples were speaking different languages according to where they lived. So like in chapter 2, they're all speaking different languages. And then all of a sudden, chapter 9, all the people are speaking the same language later on. Now this doesn't make any sense unless somehow they went from speaking different languages and all of a sudden they all started speaking the same language. It doesn't really make any sense. There's no explanation for it. And so it's kind of obvious, even to the casual observer, that this story didn't happen. The other ones also clearly didn't happen as well. I choose, and L'Dor Va-Dor chooses, not to toss out the baby with the holy water. There's a lot of people who look at this and say, well, this couldn't have happened. The whole thing's nonsense. I'm out of here. I want nothing to do with Judaism. I want nothing to do with the Torah. I want nothing to do with religion. I'm out. But what we attempt to do, what my dad attempted to do, his legacy, is to take the Torah and to look at it rationally and to say, many of these things didn't really happen, but they're truisms. And they teach us about Jewish ideals, Jewish values, and how we can make the world a better place. And for that reason, they're extremely valuable. If we try to convince people that they're true, that's when people leave us in droves. want nothing to do with us, especially young people who have a functioning mind. They don't buy into it. They want nothing to do with it. So we need to present to them a form of Judaism that's credible. So I guess that's kind of a long answer to the short question. Yeah, go ahead, Sharon.
So I want to answer part of what Suzanne's question was. The reason we read the Torah and we complete the cycle and start all over again is there are so many lessons and there's so many parshas, and we don't even touch on most of the parsha. And there's an abundance of lessons, whether it's true or we like it to be true or it's fable. There's still valid life lessons from almost every parsha in the entire Torah. There are parts that we don't want to read about and we want to skip. That's fine. But then there's an abundance of wonderful, wonderful wealth of knowledge and lessons that we can learn from it. And that's why we read it over and over and over again and repeat the cycle again in the following year.
You're right about that, Sharon. I mean, I study these passages in the original Hebrew, and every time I read it, I'm thinking of new things and things that can actually change our life. Like, let my people go that they may serve me. That the Jewish people have a destiny to not just be free, but to be free so we can be a blessing and serve humanity. That in and of itself, if that's all there was in this passage, Dayenu, that would be enough to make this worth our while. But I agree with you 100%, Sharon. We're just scratching the surface. And that's why these Torah sessions are interesting, because when I do the Torah reading, I get instructions. I get instructions from on high about how the service is going to go. And usually it says 5 to 6 minutes max on your explanation of the Torah reading. Why would that be? Because we're trying to do a service within a certain time so that people, their attention is kept. But there's a lot more to it. And there's a lot more to it than even what we can do here. And you might be interested to read it. You can now go on the internet and read Shemot, read this passage and all the different commentaries. You could read all these commentaries on this passage, and you could read for 10 hours all the different interpretations of this passage. But in my opinion, any interpretation which is based on this passage being true starts out in error. And because it starts out with a flawed hypothesis, it's going to end up there. Now, many times you start out with a flawed hypothesis and they get to something that makes sense, but it's kind of hard to follow that because you have to start out with something that's difficult to fathom. But there's tons of lessons, like Sharon says, in every single passage. Harris, go ahead.
I don't think God liked the Jews too much. If it wasn't for the Inquisition and World War II, there'd be 100 million Jews in the world today. Okay? And that would change everything. And we had to suffer through these 2 episodes. It's terrible.
Yeah, well, Harris, what's very interesting is that those episodes happened relatively recently. But it's been estimated by some demographers that during the Roman Empire, 1 out of 7 people in the empire were Jews. Why would they say that? It's because Judaism was a missionary religion. There were Jews in Greece, in Thessalonica. There were Jewish communities. Jews were missionizing, and they were starting to spread. In fact, Christianity was a missionary effort by Jews in the Greek-speaking world. It's a mixture of Judaism and Greek mythology. They were spreading. What happened was in Rome, when Rome destroyed the temple, they took a huge, vast amount of Jewish people with them. The Jewish people were devastated. If you go all the way back to Roman times, and if those people have lived, like maybe 500,000 people, which at that time was a huge percentage of the population, and if those people reproduced all the way till now, the amount of Jewish people in the world would be astronomical. And the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians came in and decimated the Jewish people. The Assyrians came in and got rid of 10 lost tribes of Jewish people. What would have happened if that calamity didn't happen and those Jews went on to live? The number of Jews would be staggering. But then we also have to think about how many Amalekites are there today? According to the Torah, there's none, because we wiped them all out. we exterminated all of them, except for one, the ancestor of Haman. How many Midianites are there? Sorry, none of those either. We wiped them out too. How about the Jebusites? No, we got rid of them also. In fact, 7 different tribes of people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time in and around the promised land when the Jews came in. According to the Torah, they were all wiped out. I don't think that actually happened, nor do historians, but when we look at the Jewish demography, in those days, back in the old days, they were just wiping people out left and right. And we were fortunate enough to emerge from all of that. But I think it's more than just fortune. I think we had a purpose in life, and that's why we maintained our identity. That's a good point, though, Harris. Anybody else want to share any thoughts? Valerie, we haven't heard from you today. I'm sure you must have something to say.
First of all, my condolences to you, Rabbi, my sincere condolences.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's just a germ of an idea that during talking about, the universal language and a different language, we actually do have a universal language now. It's called mathematics. The language of mathematics is universal. And if you think way back in history, in ancient history, when you talk about the city of Atlantis, that was supposedly the most advanced modern city, probably UFO, probably aliens from another planet. This is what people are talking about, some of the ufologists. And they were dealing in mathematical equations, which is a universal language. And all of a sudden that city got blown up and disappeared. And we fell back into a dark age. And then we were very modern with the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire and all these modern empires that fell by the wayside. And then we went into another period of what's called the Dark Ages, where nobody was communicating and nobody knew about medicine. And now suddenly we're coming back again and making another evolution into a more modern time. And what we're finding now is mathematics, again, is becoming a universal language. I mean, if you look through the course of history, it seems to be ebbs and flows of diasporas and universality, and then diasporas and then universality again. And the Tower of Babel just seems to be a tale to explain that in simplistic terms. I mean, if you think about it.
Well, if you think about it, it's really just a tall story.
It could be, but like Sharon said, tall stories tell tales.
That's my feeble attempt at humor. But Valerie, I do agree with you about what you're saying is a very, very important point. That if you take the various religions and we're going to say our Torah is true, it's God's word. How do I know that? Well, I can't prove it. I just have faith. And then the Christians say, no. Our Bible is God's word. How do you know that? Well, I take it on faith. Muslims say, no, it's ours. The Hindus say, no, it's the Bhagavad Gita. You'll never, ever get consensus. You'll never get people on the same page because they're always just going to be basing it on faith. But what you're suggesting is something that's very profound, that mathematics is not based on faith, and it is universal. 2 + 2 is 4 for the Jews, for the Christians, for the Muslims, and for the Hindus. And it's a common basis. It's a way that we can all relate and all find a common ground. And the common ground is reason and logic. And it's not just mathematics. It's also science. It's also that the laws of gravity are not different for Jewish people or Muslim or Hindu. And they're not based on me just saying, well, I think this story really happened. They're based on things that are provable. And because of that, humanity can find common ground in math and science, which are both kind of like the flip side. They're very, very similar. Because Einstein, to learn science, he had to learn math. So what you're saying is very profound. The way that humanity can achieve unity and harmony is by a common basis of math and science. And also, another thing that galvanizes people and makes them come together is a common enemy. When you have a common enemy and that enemy is threatening people, somehow they put aside their differences and they work together. Like even the Jewish people, when we're threatened, like Israel's threatened, all of a sudden it's like Reform, conservative, Orthodox, they're going to be there at a rally for Israel. So a common enemy, like a common threat of environmental collapse or nuclear holocaust. So that's why what we're attempting to do at L'Dor Va-Dor, by using reason, logic, science, and applying that to the religious world, it allows us and enables us to find common language, not just with Jews, but with all people, because it's based on science, math, what's real. And if you want to challenge it, we can have a discussion based on common beliefs and rational thinking. Everyone can join in this conversation of any religion. I believe, my father believed, that's the hope. That's the hope for humanity. Rational thinking and applying that to religion, applying that to politics, applying that to everything. And the most basic of it is mathematical equations.
Well, all through ancient history, it was the enlightened minds, you know, in Greek history and ancient Roman history, it was the mathematicians that discovered the planets, that discovered medicine, that discovered all forms of different discoveries in various entities, various civilizations. It was the enlightened minds, the very few select enlightened minds that applied mathematics and science all throughout world history. That's why I'm saying it's just a germ of an idea that you sparked in my mind, that there was a common language at some point, a universal language, and the mass populations wouldn't accept it.
Exactly. It is a universal language, and it's similar to music also. Music also is a universal language, and love for others is also a universal language. It's something that all humans share. It's something that we can unify around. And it's an idea that's been circulating for quite a while. It's the reason why we can cooperate with the Soviet Union and have a space shuttle or a space station up there that we can both share in, because science is science. And we can unify and come together based on a common goal of trying to understand and work together to explore. And that's really the goal in Star Trek. It was all the people came together around a common desire to explore the unknown and to work together. These things can really unify us, and we're attempting to do it. Regarding Atlantis, I consider Atlantis to be right up there with the Tower of Babel. There's zero evidence, but there's all these fables about it. If you really want to look into, well, if there's no evidence, like there's nothing under the sea that they found that like relics of Atlantis, there's zero. But if you ask yourself, well, if there's zero evidence, where would they get the story from, and why do people believe it? The city of Atlantis was mentioned by Plato in Greek mythology, but he also mentioned other things like Greek gods and Mount Olympus and all types of stuff. So I wouldn't necessarily put my stock in him, but that's the basis for believing the lost city of Atlantis. It's some of the writings of Plato, who says something about this city. It is very intriguing to believe that there was this lost city that arose thousands of years ago, where people were all geniuses. And so some of the thinking is this, that, you know, the Mediterranean basin, they believe, was at one time dry land. And then when the water got up over the Straits of Gibraltar, and it got up over that, and there was climate change, the water got over it, water swept in. Atlantis was at the bottom of the Mediterranean. Water came in and wiped it out. There are some scholars who believe that could explain the lost city of Atlantis, but I'd kind of like to have some evidence that it even existed before I start explaining how it disappeared. But it is intriguing. It's a lot of fun to think about a lost city. Anybody else have any thoughts they'd like to share?
Have you not been on Congress down from JFK Hospital? It says City of Atlantis.
Okay, I stand corrected. Stanley's correct. So the Atlantis not only exists, but it's been found. And Stanley found it. I think that's a good way to conclude our discussion. There is a city of Atlantis. I do want to thank everybody for joining us. Sharon, thank you for orchestrating this and putting up with me and my tardiness. I think I showed up a minute late. I do apologize about that. Thank you, everybody, for joining in the discussion. We have a lot of things coming up. And before I close out, I will just say I sent out a message to the congregation, and I sincerely thank everybody for their good wishes and their condolences and their thoughts about our family and for my mom. You know, most people think their moms are pretty special. My mom has some really wonderful qualities, and my brothers and I, we've been talking, and the kids, and we just feel super lucky that she was around for so long, vibrant for so long, and a really just a lot of fun. She was so much fun to be with. And so when people send us our condolences and say we feel so bad, I really appreciate it. But the sadness is really overwhelmed by the joy of knowing she lived an awesome life. She ended her life very peacefully and pleasantly. And we just feel extremely, extremely fortunate. And we hope to share some of that joy and good fortune. And most of all, the way my mom led her life and some of the lessons that she taught us that can really improve lives for everybody. We hope to share that and have a celebration of her life filled with some music and some jokes. And I don't know what else, it'll be a surprise, but everybody's welcome to join us. It's gonna be at Beth Israel Sunday, May 1 at 10 o'clock. And it's gonna be available by Zoom. So if you got friends or family or anybody out there, or if you personally have trouble getting there, or if you can't get there at all and you want to watch it afterwards, we'll have it recorded. It's going to be 10 o'clock there, 12:15 at Eternal Light, and then probably around 1 o'clock at some undisclosed location. We're still looking around, probably somewhere in Boynton. And then the festivities and the food. Then we're going to have the food. We're going to have some more music. We'll have some more jokes. I'm already putting together my mom's song, and it's going to be a lot of fun, because if my mom were able to orchestrate it and to plan it, she would say, have a great time, have a lot of laughs, and make sure you have some good music and some good food. And we'll be doing that. So I hope to see you there, and on a lot of other occasions. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up over at the Mariposa and over at the Carlisle. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you pretty soon.